Last time we met, I talked about ecosystems that cover different parts of the earth. What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a community of both living organisms and non living things that interact with one another and their physical environment. Living and non living things work together in an ecosystem. They are interconnected and depend on one another. They are, in other words, interdependent. Different habitats or homes exist within a particular ecosystem. Remember, habitats are where plant and animal species normally live and grow. Species are groups of living organisms that share the same characteristics. Because they also share the same needs, they live in a shared habitat where all their needs can be met. What do organisms need to survive or continue to live? All organisms within a habitat and all habitats within an ecosystem are connected by a common need: food. Food provides nutrients and energy or fuel, which organisms need in order to grow, breathe, and move around. Where does this energy come from? Yes, the sun's energy is transferred in different ways as fuel for different organisms. But the source of nearly all our energy comes from the same place: the sun. Almost all the energy needed for life on Earth comes from sunlight. Ecosystems, from deserts to rainforests, may look very different from one another, but they all depend on the same form of energy: the sun. Energy flows through the ecosystem, passing from sunlight to plants, animals, and humans. This energy then also passes through the plants to animals and the humans. All living things within an ecosystem are interdependent on one another. They need one another in order to survive. Plants, animals, and humans are linked by the transfer of this energy in the food that they eat. For example, when you eat an apple, you are part of a link in a food chain. Where did that apple come from? A tree. And where did the tree get its energy or its food needed to grow that apple? From the sunlight. The sun's energy passed from the tree's fruit to you. You and the tree are both links in the same food chain. That's a rather simple example of only two links: you and the tree. These links or connecting steps in the food chain are called trophic levels. Because every living organism needs to eat, every organism every organism belongs to at least one food chain. Every food chain has at least two feeding or trophic levels. Trophic levels show who eats with what within an ecosystem. There are many, many food chains in nature, and every one of them has three essential or necessary parts: producers, consumers, and decomposers. Let's take a look at each one individually. All food chains begin with living things that produce their own food. On land, green plants are the main producers. Plants are the only living things that make their own food. How do they do that? That's right, they depend on the sun. The sun's energy enters the plant's leaves. Plants absorb water through their underground roots and take in carbon dioxide, a gas from the air. With the help of the sun's energy, plants change water and carbon dioxide into the food that they need to grow. This process is called photosynthesis. Producers include algae and mosses in addition to plants like trees and grasses. Plants are the first feeding step on a trophic level of every food chain. All animals depend on the plants to live, even if they do not eat plants themselves. Producers at the bottom of every food chain perform another very important job in our ecosystem. As they take in water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide, they also release oxygen into the air. Oxygen is a gas that is essential for all organisms to live. There are producers in every ecosystem, and without them, there would be no life on Earth. The next trophic level is composed of consumers. Animals cannot make their own food. Even though animals and humans receive some energy directly from the sun, they also must consume or eat food to get the energy and nutrients that they need to survive. Sometimes this trophic level is broken into more than one level or feeding step because there are several different types of consumers or eaters. The consumers in this image are the mouse, the boar, and the wolf. Some consumers eat only plants. Some eat only animals, and others eat both plants and animals. These three types of consumers have specific names. Who remembers what we call an animal who only consumes plants? Yes, a plant eater is called an herbivore. Herbivores may be as small as squirrels or as large as elephants. Can you name some other herbivores? Consumers who only eat producers? The second type of consumers belongs to the group called carnivores. Who knows what carnivores eat? That's right, carnivores are primarily meat eaters. Carnivores usually do not eat producers, but instead they eat other consumers. Examples of carnivores include lions, polar bears, and sharks. Omnivores are the third type of consumers. They eat both producers and other consumers. Rats, raccoons, skunks, and pigs are all omnivores. Many humans are omnivores too, eating both plants and animals. Do you eat both plants and animals? Then you are an omnivore. Raise your hand if you are an omnivore. When plants and animals die, they sometimes become food for another animal. Have you ever seen a vulture or a crow eating dead animals by the roadside? These consumers are animals called scavengers, but scavengers rarely finish the job. For that, nature relies upon another essential part of our food chain. Who remembers the name of the organisms that work together with the producers and the consumers? That's right, they are the decomposers. Decomposers are a special type of consumer that continues the work of scavengers if parts are left behind. Decomposers decompose or break down dead plants and animals and their wastes. By doing so, they feed themselves while returning valuable nutrients back into the soil to be reused by the organisms in the food chain. Just as the scavengers, some decomposers also eat living plants and animals. Decomposers are worms, snails, slugs, beetles, other insects, microscopic bacteria, and fungi are all some of the Earth's greatest recyclers. They are very important to an ecosystem. Without decomposers, plants would not get the nutrients that they need, and Earth would be crowded with dead animals and plants. Producers, consumers, and decomposers, the three essential parts to every food chain, create a cycle of energy. Energy is transferred in a circular fashion from one organism to another and back into the soil to help the new producers grow. If there were no producers, there would be nothing for consumers to consume, so there would be no consumers. Without consumers, there would be nothing to decompose, so there would be no decomposers. Producers, consumers, and decomposers are equally dependent upon one another. They are interdependent links in all food chains, passing stored energy from one organism to another. The ongoing regular completion of this energy cycle in food chains determines an ecosystem's ability to survive. Let's look at an example of another rather simple food chain. First, a leaf creates its own food. Next, a caterpillar eats the leaf. Then, a small bird eats the caterpillar, and then a large bird of prey swoops down and eats the small bird. Energy has passed from the leaf to the caterpillar to the small bird and then onto the bird of prey. How many trophic levels were represented? Who was the producer? Who were the consumers? There were three. Can you name any of them? First, the caterpillar consumed the leaf. Next, a small bird consumed the caterpillar. Then, the large bird consumed the small bird. But that is not the end of the cycle, is it? What is the last step, the final step of this cycle? That's right. Finally, the large bird dies and the decomposers begin their important work of breaking down the animal's body into the soil and helping the new producers grow. This simple food chain can be drawn with arrows onto a piece of paper. But nature is rarely that simple. Think about what else could happen to change the simple pattern of these circular arrows. Who else might eat the caterpillar? Perhaps a lizard or a frog would find the caterpillar tasty. And who else might eat the small bird? Perhaps a cat or a snake would make a meal out of it. Lizards and frogs and cats and snakes are members of other food chains as well. When an animal from one food chain eats a member of another food chain, two food chains connect, and the chains begin to look far more complicated with many arrows going many different ways. When food chains overlap like this, the complicated patterns that they are formed are called food webs. Many different plants and animals can be included in a food web. Before we get together again, go for a walk around your neighborhood to see how many connections you can find in the nature around you. What different parts of food chains can you identify? Who eats the berries? Who eats the flowers? Who eats the seeds? And who eats the nuts that the plants produce? Who eats the bark of the trees and the blades of the grass? We'll talk more about food chains and food webs the next time I see you. We'll see you soon.